Hi, everyone. Welcome to session 242 of Behavioral Observations. Merrill Winston returns to the podcast for what seems to be the umpteenth time. In this episode, we discuss a presentation he recently gave that dove into the seminal Catania paper, The Myth of Self-Reinforcement. In this episode, Merrill distinguishes between procedures and processes, why what we think as self-reinforcement is likely more attributable to negative reinforcement, and the age-old problem of the term non-contingent reinforcement. Merrill also spends a few minutes discussing the contributions of Hank Pennypacker, who recently passed. He talks about what he intends to present on at this year's Stone Soup Conference. And just as a quick shameless plug, you can save on the registration costs of the conference by using the promo code podcast. And Merrill rounds out this episode with some more constructive ways to think about self-management. So this is a fun episode, and if you enjoyed it, please consider sharing it with friends and colleagues. In addition to the Stone Soup Conference, we're also brought to you today by Behavior University, where their mission is to provide university quality instruction for the busy behavior analysts. Learn more about them at behavioruniversity.com/observations. We're also brought to you by HRI Recruiters. Go talk to Barbara Voss. She is the preeminent expert of all things employment in the world of behavior analysis. Go to hricolorado.com to schedule a confidential chat today. All right, that's it for opening remarks. Without any further delay, let's get to this fun conversation with Dr. Merrill Winston.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now, here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Hey, I'm back with Dr. Merrill Winston for what is now probably the umpteenth time on the podcast. How's it going, Merrill?
Good. I think it might be 4, and regardless, I think I need a black satin jacket like they give the hosts on SNL.
That's right.
You need to start doing that, man.
You know, I need to find the YouTube bit of, I think Tom Hanks when he hosted for the 5th time. They showed him like this special. It was like the Delta Lounge or something like that for the and it was like the secret club, and they had all the other people who had hosted Saturday Night Live.
Alec Baldwin, Steve Martin, they all had their jackets and stuff.
Yes, it was pretty funny. Anyway, I'll try to hunt that down for the show notes. But for those who aren't interested in that stuff, we're actually going to talk about behavior analysis. So you and I got a chance to hang out at FABA last week. It was great fun, and I definitely want to thank the folks at FABA for inviting me to come down there and not interview someone, but to get interviewed, which was great fun. And it felt like I had interviewed half the people in the audience. It was it was just a lot of folks that I had got to meet in person, which I only seen on Zoom and things along those lines. So it was great fun. One of the things that was particularly noteworthy was Dr. Willie DeLeon gave a really moving tribute to the passing of Hank Pennypacker. And although you and I want to talk about a whole different topic, I think we'd both be remiss if we didn't make some sort of remarks on Hank's contribution. I never got to meet him personally, and it's one of those interviews I really wish I did. And more importantly, just a chance to talk with him. But I know he's been incredibly influential on you, on other people that have been influential to me, like Jim Johnston and others. So I was wondering, Merrill, if you had an anecdote or some other type of comments about Hank and kind of what he meant relative to your career and behavior analysis more generally.
Sure. I don't think that I would be doing behavior analysis if it weren't for Hank. And also, honestly, I don't think I'd be doing it at the level that I'm doing it if it weren't for Hank and Jim. And I met Hank. I was an undergraduate at University of Florida. That was back in the days where it was like if your brother was in a fraternity, like you kind of automatically get in because you're a resident of the state of Florida. But that was many years ago. And I never would have been able to get into UF with the grades I had today. Like it never would have happened. So I was lucky enough to get in there, and that's where Hank was. And the first behavior analysis course I ever had was called Introduction to Applied Behavior Analysis, and it was taught by H.S. Pennypacker. And I had no idea what to expect. But from the first day of the first class, I was like, not only is what I'm going to do, but I want to be like this guy, because this guy is like, he's entertaining. He knows his stuff. He's passionate about what he does, and I was really just kind of like bowled over by his approach and his attitude and the way that he, looked at things. But the very first day of the course, he made it very clear about terminology. And he was talking about positive reinforcement and how that you don't reinforce the person, you reinforce behavior. And Hank's standard rap on that was, I'm going to try and do his voice. It was quite gravelly. It had an interesting quality to it. He was like, you don't reinforce Johnny. You reinforce Johnny's behavior. Reinforcing Johnny would involve mixing up a plaster of Paris, loading it into a caulking gun, inserting it into the appropriate orifice, pulling the trigger, and after allowing time for curing, Johnny will now be reinforced. And so he and everybody, he got a good laugh at that, of course. And it's kind of ridiculous, but that was his way of making points. And it's kind of the way that I do it. And I got that from him. So yeah, he was quite a character. The very first day he got up on the desk in his cowboy boots and hiked his pants up, and he squatted on the desk because he was trying to explain how the behavior of wild dogs got shaped up around the fire and how cavemen would feed the dogs and they'd come closer. And he's explaining all this while he's squatting on top of the desk in the classroom. So this is the kind of guy he was. And his contributions to the field were far beyond anything that I could go over in this podcast. But one of his big things was Mamatech, which was the breast self-examination program, where they taught women to detect lumps in their own breast tissue, much smaller than physicians could detect. And it was pretty groundbreaking. It was very, very interesting stuff. But yeah, that was only one of the things that Hank got into. But yeah, really, really huge contributor to the field of behavior analysis and a giant loss.
For sure. So thanks for taking a minute to tell some funny stories. I'm sure there are more to come.
There's plenty.
Yeah, it's also a good tie-in to the topic we're going to talk about today, sure. Self-reinforcement. And so you shared with me some slides that you put together for a talk about self-reinforcement, and I wanted to know why you put it together first. We'll get into what it is you talked about, but let's talk about the why first. So what made you want to choose this as a topic for exploration, and what made you think that this is information that would be good for the conference attendees, the practitioner base, et cetera, to know more about?
Sure. It really, some of my best talks come from a place of anger. And it's usually me getting upset about something that was said that just sticks in me really wrong. So many years ago, I was at a FABA conference, and a graduate student, I think she was fairly extremely upset about my comment during her talk. And I probably should have waited till the talk was over, but it just hit me so wrong in the middle of the talk. I wanted to make sure that I understood things right, and for the rest of the audience, because not that it was her fault. She was a graduate student. She was younger. She's learning these things, right? But, and I probably should have just kept my mouth shut, and said something later. But she was giving a talk on self-reinforcement, and she was describing how, and many people have done this. I'm not faulting the graduate student. If I could look back on all the errors that I made when I was a graduate student, it'd be so many, I wouldn't be able to catalog them. So, let's just putting that aside for a moment. It has to do with your training. It's not you're a bad person. But she was saying I set up, a contingency because I wanted to improve my study behavior or something like that. So I was going to give myself a movie for my study behavior. And as soon as that was said, I'm like, nah, this is a mistake. This is a misconception. And it's a common misconception And it was being displayed for everybody, and nobody really questioned it. So my question, I just raised my hand real quick. I said, just curious, do you know about Catania's 1975 article about the myth of self-reinforcement? He had some interesting opinions on it. And she said she hadn't. And I think I asked one more question, and then I shut up for the rest of the session. But that's where it came from. Okay. That's where it came from. And I strongly disagreed, but I didn't get into a fight with her, but I just kind of brought up the point. But that's where it started.
All right. So if I say, hey, I've got this PowerPoint that I'm working on for my talk at Babbitt next week. And once I finish putting in all the comments, so I know what I'm going to say, I'm going to treat myself to a nice cold beer. So what's wrong with that statement? So
what's wrong with the statement is that the problem, well, there's a few things wrong with it. One is a confusion between reinforcement as a natural phenomenon that happens with all organisms, right? And the reinforcement procedure, which means after X happens, Y gets delivered, which is kind of the procedural aspect of it, right? So it's like going through the motions of what reinforcement looks like, right? But the problem with us humans is we tend to bastardize natural phenomena and stretch them beyond what they really are. And so, when we say things like, I'm going to give myself X, the argument that Catania makes is that this is not a positive reinforcement contingency. If anything, it's a negative reinforcement contingency. And what's happening is if you say, I'm not going to give myself this, which is, it's an odd twist of phrase anyway, giving yourself something. You get stuff and you have it. You can't actually give yourself anything. It defeats the purpose of the word give, So it's, what is typically happening in these scenarios is you're avoiding guilty feelings, you're avoiding anxiety, and it is dependent upon a very long history of don't have your dessert until you've finished your vegetables. So, and I mean a really long history of many, many, many examples of people telling you and you seeing the concept of deserving, right? Do you deserve this? That's kind of a negative reinforcement thing as well. Like if you're doing something and someone questions, do you deserve that? You kind of feel bad about having it, right? Or if they question, I don't think you deserve that, right? So keep in mind, there's a very long verbal history of these kinds of contingencies of deserving and you shouldn't have had it, right? These kinds of things, fairness. All those things figure into this, social contingencies. So what's usually happening is, like if you say, well, another example, I want some chocolate cake, but I'm not going to eat it until I run, right? Well, one of the things that happens when you don't run and you eat chocolate cake, you have bad feelings, right? You're like, man, I didn't work out. I'm going to get fat. I really shouldn't be eating this. I already went over my calories today. You could be saying any of a variety of things. Now, if you listen to what people say when they work out, they're almost joyful when they eat their reinforcement. They're like, oh, I am so glad I'm having this. Like I burned so many calories today, and you feel good about eating it. And so what really happens is this is an elaborate avoidance phenomena where if you don't do what you should, you can't enjoy your reinforcer because of your guilty feelings that were programmed into you over years and years and years and years, and lots of differential punishment. And so I think that is a more parsimonious explanation than this is the equivalent of I have money in savings, right? But I'm not going to put it into checking until I do all my push-ups, and then I'll pay myself. And it's like, you can't. And so one of the points I made in the talk is that Charles Catania realized in 1975, probably earlier than that, he realized what every actor in Hollywood already understands in a crystal clear manner. And that is, you cannot be your own agent. Okay. So the agent is the holder of the contingencies and the deliverer of the reinforcers. And what happens is when we do what we call self-reinforcement, you always have the ability to subvert the contingencies. And so my argument, and this I think was Catania's argument as well, is that in a true reinforcement contingency, it cannot be undermined. So as an example, you could have just said, screw it, I'm tired, I'm going to have my beer now. There's nothing stopping you. It's not like it's a physical impossibility. So
we are recording this at 9:13. It's 9:13 a.m. right now. So I'm not sure I'm going to have it now, but
no, but yeah. So it's not that you're giving yourself something that you already have, right? And so it is. You can always undermine it. So here's another example. Like, it's not a true contingency is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. So a true contingency is more like, I'll give you an example. The pilot, no matter how much he feels like taking off, cannot take off unless there is gas in the plane, fuel in the plane. They can't just say, you know what, I'm running a little late, I think I'm just going to take off anyway. You can't undermine that contingency of the plane cannot move if it doesn't have fuel. You can't just say, well, I decided I want to move. Well, you have no fuel. You can't, right? But if the plane is full of fuel, right? Well, the pilot can take off anytime they want, really. The only thing stopping them are rules, not an inability, right? And similarly, the only thing stopping you from drinking the beer when you're working is rules and a history of rule following. It's not like it's a physical impossibility, right? This is part of the problem. And this is why, quote, self-management programs. Self-management, we talked about a little bit. I say that's a thing.
Yeah, I want to get to that later. Yeah,
we'll get to that later. But the whole self-reinforcement thing, it's largely a ruse. And what you are doing procedurally what looks like reinforcement. I do my work and then I produce beer, right? But here's the issue. In a true contingency, you must work to get the thing, right? So part of the problem is the contingency of how to secure beer has nothing to do with you finishing a report. Like when you go to the store to buy a beer and you put down your money, they go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Did you finish that report? And you're like, no. And they're like, no beer. That's not the contingency. And when people say like, well, I'm going to do all this exercise, then I'll give myself chocolate. All right. We did not learn to exercise to procure chocolate. That's not how you get it. Like when you go to Walgreens and you get a candy bar and you come up to the counter, they don't say, give me 20 jumping jacks. Okay. This is not how we get candy. There's other contingencies for getting candy, right? Making up this one where we give ourselves candy that we already have access to. This is a ruse. We're kidding ourselves. Now, what Charles Catania would have said is that it's not that there's not something going on here, but it's not quite what you think it is. Is kind of the issue. Charles would be saying, Dr. Catania would be saying, there are larger social contingencies that you're not referencing. Like, if you're saying, I'm going to give myself chocolate cake after I run. Well, what Charles would be saying to begin with is, why are you running? Why are you running to begin with? Are you running to begin with because you have no idea how to get cake? Is that why you're running? No, you're running for other reasons. There are other contingencies. The reason why you started to run to begin with, your doctor told you you're out of shape. All right. You want to be able to participate in certain activities and you're out of shape. You want to lose weight. You want to feel better, whatever it is. Those are the contingencies that Dr. Catania would say, these are the important ones. These are the real ones. When you're doing something like, I'll give myself something I already have, it's either to alleviate your own guilty feelings or to pacify an onlooker who might say something to you like, what are you drinking beer for? You didn't even finish your report. Well, yeah, I just got tired. And then you have to defend yourself in front of the other people. And there's all these social contingencies. And these are the things that Catania is saying. These are the important things. These are the real things. right? These are all the reasons why you're doing all this to begin with. This is the reason why you're saying you're going to give yourself something after, because we've identified a problem with our own behavior. I can't seem to do this.
Are you looking for a new job, but you're overwhelmed with all the emails that you're getting from various ABA agencies? What if there was someone who was in your corner and could help you find the perfect job placement? Well, that person exists. Barbara Voss has been working as a recruiter for over 30 years, and her company, HRIC, specializes in placing BCBAs in permanent full-time positions throughout the United States. Barbara has been placing BCBAs since 2011, so she knows our business, and she offers personalized service to any BCBA looking for a new position. She also helps companies looking to hire BCBAs too. Here are just some of the things Barbara can help you with. She can provide information about salary ranges in different markets across the country. She can help you write your resume. She can coordinate and prepare you for the interview process, and even help negotiate the right salary for you. And best of all, there are no charges to any candidate for all of these services. When you're ready to make a change and want to work with someone who will listen to you and understand what you need in a new position, contact Barbara at HRIC. To schedule a confidential discussion, head over to hricolorado.com. Again, that's hricolorado.com, and hit the contact button to connect with Barbara. You won't be disappointed. That negative reinforcement cycle is an interesting way to frame this, and reminds me of a conversation I had with Hanley a couple of years ago when I was asking him about, his presentations are pretty, legendary in terms of their popularity. And I asked him, what his approach is to delivering these compelling talks. And he said he practices a lot. And he said, anxiety drives the bus to practice, which I thought was just a great phrase.
Yeah. And so he's being accurate, however. He's not saying something like, well, I'm doing this because I'm going to give myself $1,000 afterwards or let myself buy a guitar. He's actually identifying the real contingencies operating. And that is, it's anxiety reduction, a lot of it. And I can identify with what Greg said because, like when I did my song at FABA, I practiced that, at least 100 times, 80% of them sober. So, that is also driven by, I don't want to mess up. And the more I practice, the less I'm worried about it, right? My anxiety abates. And that's the real contingency. And here's why. You can always give yourself the beer, but you can't instantly say, anxiety, go away, right? There's a way to make the anxiety go away, and it's called completing your assignment. Now, see, that is a true contingency, right? This is what Catania was saying. He actually mentioned, it's a family show, but this is a human function. He mentioned masturbation. And he said, look, that kind of thing doesn't count as self-reinforcement. And the reason why, Catania's so naughty, the orgasm cannot be delivered independently from the act. Okay. That is, you can't just say, well, I kind of really want an orgasm, but I'm kind of tired tonight. So I think I'm just going to Uber orgasm it and just, I only want the orgasm. I don't want to do any work. I'm just going to give it to myself now. And what Catania's saying, you can't do that. There's a contingency. It requires stimulation for a certain amount of time, right? You can't just say, I just want to cut right to the chase on this one. I'm exhausted. Okay. It can't be done. In a less embarrassing, more family friendly example, I did martial arts for a very long time. When you're wearing a heavy uniform, the gi, the feedback you get, right, you can't undermine it. And that is the popping sound of the uniform, because when you pull your punch back as quickly as you throw it out, the uniform lags and then it slaps against your body. It happens with kicks and it happens with punches. When they are sufficiently fast, you hear a popping sound, right? And that popping sound differentially selects good kicks over poor kicks, because if you don't get the popping sound, you're not pulling it back quickly enough. Okay. You cannot say, I worked pretty hard today. I think I'm going to give myself the popping sound. No, you can't. You can't undermine a true contingency. This has to happen for this other thing to happen. And no matter how much you want the second thing to happen, it can't. It's physically impossible. right? The same is not true of transferring money from savings to checking, or in that one study I cited, moving nickels from a pill timer on your belt to your hand. Okay. So that's the same as moving money from savings to checking, as far as I'm concerned.
It's all. I think the term is they're fungible assets.
Fungible assets, right? That's not, moving a nickel from a pillbox timer on the side of your belt to your hand is not positive reinforcement. It's called moving nickels. Okay, that would be the accurate description. You're moving nickels. But yeah, that's one of the things. And so it's interesting because some people get angry when you bring it up. The first guy, a buddy of mine I talked to about, he's a behavior analyst. And he said, it's kind of the same thing you said. And he goes, wait a second. I can reinforce my own behavior if I want, like I had to finish this coursework. And I told myself when I finish the coursework, I'm going to buy myself a guitar. And I said, that's not positive reinforcement. Yeah, you can buy yourself the guitar. And yeah, you can wait until you're done. But that's not what positive reinforcement is. Okay. You could get the guitar at any time. Okay. It is the reason that you're not getting it is what's important. What are the contingencies? And what are the contingencies to support your announcing it? And that was one of the things that the Hayes and Friends, so I like to say and Friends instead of et al. Because it just sounds friendlier and more like the Fox News channel. But when Hayes and Friends did their study, right, that's one of the things they were looking at. Did you announce a contingency to yourself? I'm going to do this way. Or did you announce it to others? Because sometimes that's what we do when we're trying to self-manage.
All right. So let's get into the Hayes article in just 1 second, though.
Okay.
We are going to pause for to talk about the Stone Soup Conference very briefly. So you're going to be talking at the Stone Soup Conference this year. I think you've talked at that conference before, if I'm not mistaken, and they were delighted with that presentations. Sufficiently so to have you back again to talk
against their better judgment.
Yes. We all have our faults, Merrill, but
we all have our fault.
Anyway, so what are you going to be talking about, and why should people consider attending? And obviously, don't give so much detail so as to ruin the motivation to sign up for the event.
Sure. So I'll be talking about a behavioral view of mental illness. So I will be taking a romp through the DSM, not page by page. I'm just going to reference some of the,
that would take a while.
That would take a while. And remember, the DSM, there's something for everybody. That actually should be their thing. That should be their catchphrase. They should actually put it on the book. But yeah, we're going to go.
It's like Canadian Tire. They have something for everyone there.
But yeah, I'm going to go through that and talk about basically how, as a behavior analyst, how can you look at these phenomena? They're real phenomena. People have real problems that cause real disruption in their lives and cause pain and anguish and suffering. They're not made up. They're not pretend. But they're also, one of the points I'll be making, they're not what people think they are. This is the point that I make. They are real. The problems are real. The symptoms are real. All these things are real. But the way that it's talked about, the way that we view it, the way that we try to interface as behavior analysts, I'll be talking about that and how we can look at it, even if we maybe still have to use the language that others use. But when we look at it, we can translate it for us so that it is not mysterious and it is understandable in terms of all human behavior, and that it doesn't have to be viewed as a dichotomy. I think it's behavioral. I think it's more mental health. That is a dubious distinction.
Yeah, people say, is it behavior or sensory? I hear the same thing all the time, particularly in schools. Yeah,
and we'll talk some of that. Yeah.
All right. So if folks are interested in hearing more about this, I strongly suggest going to just Google Stone Soup Conference. It's easy to find. It'll pop right up. You can go to the show notes for this episode as well over at the brand new and improved behavioralobservations.com. And you can use the promo code podcast to save on the already very inexpensive registration fee. This is by far the best deal in behavior analysis for CEUs, particularly when you factor in the quality of the talks that will be presented during that day. And if you're not available on October 20th, the talks will be available on demand afterwards. So lots of good stuff about the event, and the proceeds go to supporting tuition for individuals receiving ABA services. So great talks, great price, great cause. So, all right. Before we get to the Hayes article, what's your beef with non-contingent reinforcement?
And I think Vollmer has the same beef, so I don't think I'm alone.
I know. I've heard this before. I just want to hear.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my joke on that non-contingent reinforcement, it is the premier behavioral oxymoron, because if you want it to be completely, well, here's one of the things, and I explain this in the talk. Reinforcement requires a contingency. We all know this, but it also requires contiguity. Okay. So with non-contingent reinforcement, clearly there is no contingency. Now, if there is no contingency, then reinforcement as a process cannot happen. And so we speak of reinforcement as selecting behavior, right? And others go by the wayside because they are not selected. This is like natural selection through positive reinforcement. It's kind of a natural selection of behavior. So the more accurate description, and there's nothing wrong with doing what we call non-contingent reinforcement. It's a great thing to do, but it's not positive reinforcement. It is the delivery of a stimulus that is a putative reinforcer, alleged reinforcer for some behaviors under some conditions. This is what people are doing. They're taking an alleged reinforcer, something that we believe has the power to strengthen some kinds of behaviors, and we are presenting it independently of behavior. So it's really just,
in fairness, Merrill, just would it be, I think it's probably also accurate to say, previously demonstrated reinforcing stimuli. In other words, somebody's preference assessment, and they realize that, Johnny likes X, Y, and Z, and then they deliver these X, Y, and Z response independently. So, but I just want to quibble with the alleged term, because a lot of the studies will do some, either directly or indirectly try to establish something as or identify things as reinforcers prior to.
But I think I agree with that. I would add a caveat, though. It doesn't matter if you've identified it as a reinforcer or not. As we know, it's not necessarily going to work for any specific behavior under all conditions, under all motivational conditions, punishment conditions, all those things. So I still call it an alleged one, even if we have seen it work, or at least a partial reinforcer or something like that. We have some evidence under some conditions it has functioned as a reinforcer. That's how I would say it. I don't think anyone expects it to function under all. Sure. So yes. And here's the thing. It's not actual reinforcement because nothing's being selected. So it's the non-contingent delivery of a happy stimulus. You may as well just say that. It's you're giving him something nice for nothing, but that's not reinforcement. But it's a good thing because it affects all kinds of other things. It could be an abolishing operation. It could be a motivating operation. You could acquire condition reinforcing properties because you're the one doling out the stimulus, right? So there's a lot of wonderful things that could go on just by doling out a non-contingent stimulus that has been previously used as a reinforcer under some conditions, which is why they just go with NCR, because the rest is mouthful.
I certainly concede all those points, and that especially the one about language and the clunkiness of the task of describing this process accurately makes NCR a very handy shorthand.
Yeah, I just like people to know what's actually happening, regardless of what you want to call it. This is not the self-reinforcement, the non-contingent reinforcement. These are only two of the things people get confused about regarding reinforcement. People mess it up, 6 ways from Sunday.
All right, this is the last commercial break of the podcast, and I'm just checking out the Behavior University website. I'm looking at their webinars page, and they have a lot of cool ones coming up. There's two of them I'm looking at that are by Dr. Amanda DeGangi, and hoping I'm saying that name correctly. Let's see, one of them's taking place on October 26th. It's about toilet training, Boy, that's a way to get audience participation, isn't it? Did you ever do a toilet training workshop? There's no shortage of participation or questions being asked by the audience. She's also doing one on November 16th called Babies, Recent and Historical Applications of ABA with Infants and Their Parents. Again, that's on November 16th. Both of those are for 2 learning CEUs. And these webinars, as I've told you before, they sell out. So if this is something that you're interested in, go to behavioruniversity.com, check out the webinars. And if you're buying anything on the site, go to behavioruniversity.com/observations to get your listener-specific promo code. All right, that's it for behavioruniversity.com. Let's get back to the rest of this conversation with Merrill. Well, these are 2 things that we see a lot, though, so I appreciate you taking time to elaborate how people should think about these things. It's one of those things too. It's, when we're talking with lay persons, we need to speak clearly and avoid jargon. There was a great FABA talk by Derek Reed about that very topic, about how our, a lot of the behavioral terms have been empirically demonstrated to be off-putting relative to, their regular language / non-jargon equivalent. I don't know if he's gonna be talking at. I didn't even think about this, but he's going to be talking at Stone Soup as well. I'm not sure if he's going to discuss this or not. But anyway, it's an interesting point to bring up, is that we have to have this kind of almost. We need to be. It's one of those things where we need to communicate effectively with stakeholders, and at the same time maintain awareness of what the technical proper aspect, proper details are of whatever the phenomenon we're trying to describe. So,
yeah, one of the difficulties is using the lay language, using things that are comfortable. But the way I like to talk about it is, you're not drinking the other person's Kool-Aid, because if you drink the other person's Kool-Aid, you're going to start to destroy your own concepts and misunderstand them. I just like to hold their Kool-Aid in my hand while I talk to them. Okay, so that I kind of accept it, but I don't really drink it. I'm just kind of holding it in my hand. And that's how I encourage behavior analysts to think about this problem, is that you do have to talk to them. You can't reject their Kool-Aid, but you can say thank you when they hand it to you and just hang on to it while you're chatting with them, so to speak, without really drinking it. When you start to drink other people's Kool-Aid, then you start to buy into the concepts they're using without unpacking the concepts, and then you get a little bit lost. So that's,
Well, yeah, we could do a whole show on that, but
that's a whole side thing.
That's right. I'm imagining you like looking at Kool-Aid in a wine glass and like holding up the light, and swirling it, And
it's like, oh, this is
examining the bouquet. This is very berry. I think I could run through a wall now.
Oh yeah.
All right. So why did you cite what's this Hayes paper you cited, and why did you feel it was noteworthy to bring into the talk?
Well, I just wanted to give a few examples. Like, it wasn't really like special or the other ones. I just wanted to give like a few different takes from a few different time periods. That's all. But the Hayes article, I just wanted to give a couple of like the way a couple of people looked at it, tried to pick apart what is this self-reinforcement. So, and that's one of the reasons why I think I looked at it. I think it was also referenced in one of the other articles that I read, and I was like, oh, I want to check that out as well. But yeah, so that's why I included it. I just wanted at least a few to refer to, because I really just wanted to, say that nobody was really referencing what Catania was talking about in their own articles. And so, and Catania, wrote it well before these articles. And it's just, but, it may not have been a popular article. It was published in the Behavior Analyst. It was fairly short. I don't know that there was a follow-up. So maybe just a lot of people missed it. I don't know. But he made really good points in it. But that's, one of the reasons why I picked the Hayes study.
Got it. All right. I know we don't have a lot of time left. You've got a meeting you have to get to, and I've got to get on the road and, kind of visit some schools. But so we've talked about, some of the problems with self-reinforcement. And, again, I think your points are clear. But what I'd like to do is maybe close with some, what might be some constructive ways to think about not necessarily reinforcement, but self-management. And, I know you always love to talk about rules and things along those lines. So if someone's trying to, use behavioral, strategies and concepts and principles to improve their own behavior, and previously they were, trying to explain things in the terms that we started the podcast with, i.e., like, oh, I'm going to do X, then I'm going to go, watch a movie, or I'm going to go have some ice cream, or I'm going to go have a glass of wine, or whatever. And so we've been through all the ways in which that is not necessarily the best way to think about it. So what is a good way to think about self-management, particularly for those who are looking at these things in a manner such that they want to improve their, aspects of their lives?
Sure. And I can still go back if you want, answer the question you had about the Hayes article, but we can come back to it. But we never did address it. I don't think.
Oh, let's do that then. Let's do that, and then we'll close on what people should have people should think about this instead.
I think you had a question about the statement that they made, the quote from the Hayes studies, in that I'll read the quotes because I think these are the ones you're talking about. In external reinforcement. Oh, wait, let me see if there's two of them. Yeah, that's it. In external reinforcement, a consequence not earned is a consequence lost. He was talking about that. I don't even know exactly what that means, but I do think he's using the word lost in an unusual way, because if you say, I lost my hat, someone goes, well, did you have it? Oh, no, I never had it. I just couldn't get one. Well, that's not how we use the word lost, right? You use the word lost for something that you had. This is like a conceptual losing.
Like a lost opportunity.
Yeah, but see, when we say a lost opportunity, that's stretching the meaning of the word lost. It's using it in a different capacity, in a much more conceptually different capacity. It's like saying I missed out on it. I missed an opportunity. That's another way of saying I lost out, right? Or I lost it. But it's a different use of the word lost, I guess. But he says in self-reinforcement, usually at best, a consequence not earned is a consequence delayed because the subject owns the consequence to begin with. It's just an odd way of talking about how this all works, like owning a consequence. It's kind of unusual. A consequence is not something you own. A consequence is a real-time phenomena, when we're talking behaviorally. Right?
So I own a bicycle, and at the end of the workday, I can hop on the bike and ride, but is the bicycle a reinforcer, or is the activity? Yeah, the activity might be a reinforcer, I guess, but
or there's reinforcers produced in the activity, or access might reinforce the behaviors that produced access. Sure. But yeah, I think that they found in that study that the bigger differences, even though they were doing analysis of variance and not just like single subject data in that particular study, that the biggest differences they got were when people announced the contingencies, which alludes to social pressure.
Well, real quick, I know what was the actual preparation? What did they actually examine in the study?
They were looking at comprehension on tests. And the study had a number of, I think, problems with it because of the way they were using reinforcers. The reinforcers they chose, I don't get this. They were college students. I don't know if they were starving college students, but the reinforcers were peanuts and M&Ms. I mean, you use that for like a 5-year-old. The reinforcers for college students would have to be like beer or cash or something, not peanuts and M&Ms. So anyway. It was an unusual preparation, I thought, but I do think that the findings that they got better study on some level when they announced the contingency socially doesn't surprise me and is consistent with how this reinforcement phenomenon is. It's more of a negative one. I announced what I would do because I'm going to look like a fool if I don't do it. That's aversive. I want to avoid it. That's a very common thing. We've all used this strategy, right? We some of us will announce it on purpose because we know once we set that in motion, people are going to give us a real hard time and it's hard to take it back, which if you like, that can segue into self-management.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. So I look at self-management much, I guess, the same way that Skinner did pretty much. but I don't know that he said it this way, but I'm going to say it this way. You're engaging in behavior that will function to alter the probability of subsequent behavior. And by alter the probability, it could mean that it will make the behavior more or less probable depending on your problem. So as an example, Skinner, if it was rainy or it was going to rain later in the day and he knew he needed an umbrella, instead of just trying to remember to take it, he would put it on the door handle. Well, if you describe that, you're engaging in behavior now, putting the umbrella on the door handle, that will dramatically increase the probability that you will take it with you because you're going to see it when you open the door. You have to touch it, right? So that is a perfect example. I know that there are others that are more different. That's a perfect example of self-management. I'm going to do something now, right? That later on, when the motivational variables may be different and I'm not thinking about an umbrella, right? The probability of me taking the umbrella will be much higher because of behavior that I already did. And we'd call it planning, organizing, putting things in your calendar. So these are self-management things. And the reason why, incidentally, we didn't get into this, and I agree with Catania, adding the word self causes more problems than it illuminates anything. You don't need to call it self-management. I mean, the self part is irrelevant. You could just say, I'm engaging in behavior that will increase the probability of later behavior that is important, right? And the self part, you're always doing all your behavior yourself. So, we don't call it self other things. Oh, that's the other thing I forgot to mention for those who think that there is self-reinforcement. You'll note the lack of people talking about self-punishment. Okay, except for that guy in the Da Vinci Code Silas, who would whip himself on the back. Okay, nobody else does this. That is, you don't say like, okay, I'm going to set up a contingency. If I don't do this, I'm going to hit myself in the head with a hammer. Okay, nobody does these things, and it would seem ludicrous to people. Or how about self-extinction? I'm going to put myself on self-extinction. I'm going to put myself on self-punishment. My point is, if you can do self-reinforcement, you should be able to do everything else. And I think people, it would seem silly to them for them to punish their own behavior. That would seem silly to them. Yet self-reinforcement seems like a thing. And I'm like, if it's good for one, it's good for the other.
I think there was an app that kind of used an avoidance paradigm where basically like you could set aside like some amount of money, and almost like you could think of it almost like in some sort of escrow account. And if you didn't do X, Y, and Z, it would send that money. It would donate it to a cause that you've identified that's antithetical to your values. And so
that app was probably developed by Dave Piles, because he used to do that with one of his graduate students with her permission, because she had a problem getting stuff done. So he said, give me 5 checks made out to $200 each, but don't make out who it's to. Just sign them and give them to me. And for every week you're late, I'll send one to the charity you hate the most. And I can't remember how effective it was, but I'm guessing it was pretty effective. But this brings me to another point about self-management. If I call it, the example I gave, I call it recruiting social contingency enforcement. This is what I call it. Recruiting social contingency enforcement. If you want to see a beautiful example of this, I have a video in my presentation. If you've ever seen the movie Young Frankenstein, there is a point where Gene Wilder wants to go in to learn to tame the monster, played by Peter Boyle, and who is in like a dungeon cell. And what he does is he engages his staff in a social contract because he knows he cannot trust himself. So it is what he's trying to do is decrease the probability that he will run out of the cell and destroy his attempt at establishing rapport with the monster he created. So he tells everyone, no matter how terribly I scream, no matter how I beg you, do not open this door, okay? Or you will undo everything I've done. Do you understand, right? And, they're all like, yes, doctor. And Marty Feldman's like, nice knowing you. And then he goes in there and they lock it. And the monster starts screaming and Gene Wilder starts pounding on the door. Let me out of here. I was joking. Can't you guys take a joke? Mommy. And he's like going through the stuff and they don't open it. Right. And he eventually does it. But this is a beautiful example of recruiting social contingency enforcement. Right. And however, when you recruit social contingency enforcement, you can't just recruit anybody. It shouldn't be your wife. It shouldn't be your buddy. It should be somebody who will hold your feet to the fire, like, I don't know, an ex-wife, your attorney, okay? Anybody who really dislikes you. All right, no, really, you have to be careful because you'll weasel your way out of it with somebody who likes you too much. So if you're going to recruit social contingency enforcement, ask your major professor. They'll do it. So, but no, the point being, you don't want to ask somebody that can be cajoled, coaxed, intimidated, pleaded with, right? Like Gene Wilder pounding on the door, right? They have to be firm. Otherwise, it doesn't work, right? And so a lot of us do that. We'll say, hey, dude, hold on to this for me. Don't give it to me until Tuesday because I'll drink the whole thing, right? Like, this is a common thing people do. That's a beautiful example of self-management. Now, is it self-reinforcement? No. Why are you doing it? It's probably an avoidance-based thing, right? You're avoiding doing the wrong thing by having somebody help enforce a contingency. So it's usually, there may be some positive reinforcement draped up in there somewhere, but it's primarily a negative reinforcement phenomena. You're avoiding failing. You're avoiding these things happening. You don't trust yourself to do it. So you recruit this social contingency. The same would be true of setting up a trust for someone. I don't know why they call it a trust. They really should call it a mistrust because that's kind of why you're setting it up. But I set up a mistrust fund for my kid, right? If I trusted them, I wouldn't be setting up a fund, would I?
That's right. They could just manage the money themselves.
Yeah, it's a mistrust fund. But yeah, that's a great example. So these self-management things, like we all do them. Say, okay, here's another example. Doing things now that will reduce the aversiveness of something later. So as an example, I'm going to work out. I'm going to do my VR boxing. I got to make sure I have my cold beverage here. I got to make sure I have my towel here. I got to make sure that the air is turned down a little bit. And why? It will increase the probability I will finish my workout. I've got all the stuff I need, right? So it's another stab at self-management. I would put anything under the rubric of self-management for any behavior that you engage in that will increase the probability of behavior later or decrease it if you're trying to get rid of behavior, right?
See. So like meal planning, so you don't go to McDonald's like between,
Yeah, exactly. Like, here's another one. I kind of like ice cream. It's not great for me to eat, but here's what I found. If I get like a pint of Haagen-Dazs, I'll tear through half the thing before I know what happened because there's no set points on it. So I started buying ice cream bars because you eat one. Now, if you want more, you can't have a little more. You got to eat a whole other one. So
you got to commit. You got to commit to that second portion.
Exactly. But that is part of what we'd call, what I would call self-management. And that is I engaged in behavior, bought the ice cream bars, right? That would prevent me in all probability, right, from eating 800 calories worth of ice cream. The bar is like 350 calories, right? Because then, as you said, you got to commit to a second bar and then guilt kicks in and everything else. But the point being, I tend not to eat all 3 ice cream bars like I might eat the entire container of Haagen-Dazs, right? Because but people do things like this all the time. Those are self-management things. Now, if you ask, what maintains that? Is it positive reinforcement? It's likely negative. The reason we do it is it's avoidance. I don't want to eat too much, right? That's the whole reason the whole thing is set in motion. So why are you doing this? I don't want to eat too much. Oh, so you want to avoid overeating? Yeah, negative reinforcement paradigm. I mean, more than anything else, unless it's just something like, oh, I just love ice cream bars. I hate eating it out of the container. That's a little bit different contingency, than I'm avoiding overeating. So I'm buying specifically portioned food, right? So that would be an avoidance paradigm too, I believe. but it falls under the category of self-management. I'm engaging in different behavior now, so I won't have excess behavior later, which is a thing. And now Catania would ask, why are you doing all this? What are the meta contingencies that support buying portioned ice cream? And the answer would be, I got on the scale the other day, I was too heavy, right? And then Catania probably would have asked, why do you care about being heavy? And I'd be like, oh, it's bad for medical and my pants won't fit and all this. And then he would say, those are the important variables. Those are really the important variables, right? Because that's what sets the whole thing in motion, right? It all starts with bad report from the doctor, and then,
right.
So that's
a bad number on the scale.
Right. But I think all he was doing was pointing to the larger contingencies and say, stop looking so close at what you're doing right now and look a little bit larger around why did all this start to begin with? And that's the question he's asking. And quite honestly, I think that's the more relevant question, right? Why did you set all this into the motion? Why did the graduate student working with Dave Piles, why did she come to him to hold checks for her? Okay. Well, she wasn't getting things done. And she knew it, and it was causing her anxiety, right? So that's where all that starts. But I think those are really kind of the important variables when we're talking about self-management or self-reinforcement or really self-anything. It's all, I think what I'd like to say to all the behavior analysts is that it's all behavior, and that adding the word self to it is more confusing than enlightening. It really doesn't add anything. Right, what it's saying is that, or like self-control. Self-control begins with control by others, right? And when you get to the point that you can't see others and you can't see any punishing contingencies and you can't see any threats, but the person's still doing it, then we say, damn, dude, you're disciplined, right? Why do we say that? Because we see you doing things that I would only do if somebody was making me do it, right? And so then we say, oh, you are self-disciplined, right? But the only reason I say that is I cannot tact the contingencies controlling your behavior. But it's not the self. It's a long history of negative and positive reinforcement, all together, right? And that's kind of how you got where you are. But when, with self-control, oh, look at Merrill, he's engaging in self-control. Is it really self-control when I bite my lip? I'm biting my lip in an IEP meeting so I don't get in trouble by saying something that will really aggravate people, right? So is it truly self-control or is it control by others, right? But when we don't see anybody say, Merrill, be careful about what you say. You didn't hear anybody say it. Yet I am careful about what I say. Then we'll tact it as self-control because we cannot see the agents and we cannot tact the history. So that's when people tend to invoke self. But does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense.
I just don't find it very, very useful. I mean, it's nice to say and it sounds good, but I did it myself, but I should be proud. But yeah, so that's all it means. It doesn't mean we can't engage in behavior that will help change our future behavior. We most certainly can, but we look at the reasons why we're doing it and how we learn to do that, right? And what maintains that kind of behavior. Yeah.
All right. Good stuff, Merrill. I appreciate you coming on and adding some clarity to how we talk about these things. And I also look forward to seeing you at the Stone Soup Conference. So I guess until the next appearance on the show, I really should start thinking about some sort of sport coat, for multiple guests.
Any kind of bling. I will accept badges, buttons, hats,
right.
Backpacks, thermoses. All right, Matt. Well, thank you very much. It was fun as always.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.